She was Florida's top law enforcement officer, a Fox News regular, a Trump ally. But today, in a stunned courtroom, the judge uttered two words that made her snap: custodial sentence. Watch as Pam Bondi's power evaporates and her fight to stay out of prison begins. The moment the gavel of justice swung back, the gavel cracked like a gunshot, a sharp, authoritative sound meant to restore order. Instead, it was the prelude to chaos. The judge's next words, delivered not in a roar but in a chilling, judicial monotone, truly exploded the Florida courtroom into a vacuum of utter silence. All oxygen seemed to vanish. On one side of the room, prosecutors sat with studied neutrality, their pens poised. On the other, former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, once a towering figure of legal and political power, stared ahead unseeing, her famously composed facade fracturing in real time, for the entire gallery to witness. The camera-ready smile, the steely gaze she'd used to dominate news cycles for a decade, dissolved into a mask of pure and varnished shock. Her lawyer's hand shot out from beneath the table, fingers gripping her forearm as if to steady a sinking ship. The phrase custodial sentence hung in the air-conditioned chill, toxic and inescapable. It wasn't shouted. It was simply woven into the dry legal reasoning of the judge's remarks. But its effect was seismic. For the first time in the months of this highly publicized legal battle, a case stemming directly from her actions in the turbulent aftermath of the 2020 election, the abstract notion of prison had been made concrete by the one person whose opinion mattered. This was no longer about legal briefs, spirited cable news debates, or political spin from allies. The theoretical had just collapsed into the terrifyingly practical. This was now about the very real, looming prospect of orange jumpsuits, steel bars clanging shut, and a permanent stain that no future political comeback could ever erase. The case, which has captivated and divided the nation, centers on allegations that Bondi, in her post-government role as a Trump-affiliated advisor, was a key architect in a pressure campaign targeting local election workers. Prosecutors allege she leveraged her stature as a former attorney general to lend false credibility to baseless claims of voter fraud, specifically focusing on officials in key swing states. The charges are grave: conspiracy to defraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress upon public servants simply for doing their jobs. These individuals, as the indictment reads, were subjected to a torrent of false accusations and threats, enabled by the deliberate actions of the defendant. For months, Bondi's defense team has painted the case as the ultimate political persecution, a weaponization of the judiciary designed to silence a prominent conservative voice. They framed her involvement as protected political speech, the kind of heated advocacy expected in a contested democratic process. They argued she was a target, not because of any crime, but because of who she allied with and the narratives she challenged. This narrative played well in certain media echo chambers, building a shield of partisan grievance around her. But today, in this subdued courtroom, the judge's ominous tone and specific language suggested that shield was cracking. The courtroom, the law itself, was not buying the narrative. By invoking the inevitability of a custodial sentence if the state proves its case, the judge did something monumental. He removed politics from the equation and placed conduct front and center. The message was clear: actions have consequences, and the scale of these alleged actions, regardless of the political context, may demand the highest price the justice system can extract from a citizen. The gavel's echo had faded, but the judge's words were now permanently etched into the case, and onto Pam Bondi's ashen face. 2. Section 2. From power player to defendant. To understand the seismic, jaw-dropping nature of this moment, the very sight of her composure disintegrating, you have to fully remember who Pam Bondi was. For 8 years as Florida's Attorney General, she wasn't just a politician. She was a legal celebrity and a conservative gladiator. She commanded airtime on Fox News with the ease of a primetime host. Her sharp, accusatory style perfectly suited for cable news battles. As a staunch early and vocal ally of former President Donald Trump, her loyalty cemented her in the innermost circles of power. Her tenure was a marathon of high-profile, culturally divisive battles, leading multi-state lawsuits against the Affordable Care Act, vigorously defending Florida's controversial stand-your-ground laws, and challenging same-sex marriage rulings. She didn't just work within the law. She weaponized it for ideological combat, becoming a beloved figure to the base and a formidable foe to opponents. Her world was one of marble lobbies, private donor retreats, and green rooms. She moved through a landscape where a call from her could shift a news cycle or alter a political strategy. Her word carried the weight of the state's top legal office long after she left it, and her connections ran deep into the dark money networks and power centers of modern Republican politics. This was Pam Bondi, assured, untouchable, and shielded by a fortress of influence and affiliation. That's precisely why her agonizing transition from a figure delivering legal opinions to one desperately needing a legal defense represents one of the most stark and dramatic falls from grace in recent American political memory. It is a reversal so complete it feels Shakespearean. The investigation meticulously peeled back the layers of her post-administration life, focusing laser-like on the volatile, feverish weeks following the November 2020 election. While she was no longer a public official, prosecutors allege she operated with the implied authority of one. The state's case paints a picture of a coordinated pressure campaign, and alleges Bondi was a key instrument in it. According to the evidence timeline, she is accused of participating in strategy calls where unproven conspiracy theories about voting machines and ballot dumps were discussed as fact. She then allegedly used her credentials, introducing herself as former Attorney General Pam Bondi on calls and in communications to lend an aura of official legitimacy and grave concern to these debunked claims. The specific targets, prosecutors say, were nonpartisan, local election officials and low-level workers in key swing states like Georgia and Arizona. These individuals, suddenly finding themselves accused of orchestrating a national coup by a former top law enforcement official, described experiencing pure terror, their professional reputations and personal safety evaporating overnight. The criminal twist is the allegation of knowing deception. The prosecution's mountain of evidence aims to prove that Bondi, with her legal acumen and access to information, either knew the claims were false or acted with reckless disregard for the truth. Her defense of political speech collides with the state's framing of a deliberate fraud, alleging she wasn't just advocating for a candidate, but knowingly participating in a scheme to harass and intimidate public servants with lies. This is the damning core of the case, that she transformed her former title from a badge of honor into a tool of coercion. The powerhouse had allegedly become a predator, and the law she once embodied had now turned its full, unforgiving gaze upon her. The pivotal moment, the one that sucked the air from the room, came not during a dramatic trial testimony, but in the often technical quiet of a pre-trial hearing. The subject was the admissibility of key evidence, emails, call logs, and witness statements that formed the backbone of the prosecution's timeline. Bondi's defense team, in a final, fervent bid to neuter the case before it reached the jury, argued that a vast majority of this material constituted protected, robust political speech. Her lawyer, his voice a blend of indignation and legal precision, insisted that commenting on election integrity, even fiercely, was at the very heart of First Amendment freedoms, and that Bondi's actions were indistinguishable from the work of any passionate campaign advocate. But the judge, a veteran jurist known for a scholarly demeanor rather than courtroom theatrics, embarked on a calm, methodical, and utterly devastating dismantling of their entire premise. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Leaning forward over the bench, his glasses perched low on his nose, he addressed the defense counsel with a focus that felt like a laser. "The court," he began, each word measured, "is having significant difficulty in distinguishing between protected political advocacy and what is alleged by the state in this specific instance." He paused, letting the distinction hang. What is alleged here is not merely vigorous debate. It is alleged to be a coordinated effort to target private citizens, individuals carrying out their public duties with knowingly false accusations, which in turn caused documented severe psychological and professional harm. He then invoked legal precedent, his citation slicing through the defense's broad First Amendment shield. The line between persuasion and coercion, he stated, reviewing a prior ruling, is crossed with deliberate falsehood. When speech becomes a vehicle for deliberate fraud, with the intent to incite unlawful action or inflict severe injury, its protection is not absolute. This was the critical legal pivot. The judge was categorizing the alleged actions not as politics, but as a potentially fraudulent conspiracy with identifiable victims. The room, already still, seemed to freeze. Legal analysts watching later would note this was the moment the hearing transcended procedure. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Based on the nature of the charges and the evidence proffered, the judge continued, if the state proves its case as outlined, the federal sentencing guidelines will inevitably point toward a custodial sentence. The severity of the alleged harm, the systematic targeting of civil servants demands it. The word inevitably echoed in the silence, a judicial thunderclap. It wasn't a verdict of guilty that power still resided solely with a future jury, but it was the clearest, most dire warning possible from the arbiter of the law. He was essentially providing a roadmap to the trial's end. If the prosecutors succeeded in convincing 12 ordinary people that Bondi knowingly participated in this campaign of falsehoods, there would be no alternative to prison, no leniency, no sentence of probation or home confinement. The judge had preemptively closed the door on that possibility, framing the potential crime as too grave. This declaration stripped away the last veneer of political abstraction and replaced it with a cold, clinical assessment of consequence. For Pam Bondi and everyone present, the theoretical had just been sentenced, and only the formalities remained. This was the precise and varnished moment Pam Bondi's famed composure shattered. For years, her public identity had been built on a foundation of inflappable, even defiant, assurance. But as the judge's words, custodial sentence, inevitably, severity of the alleged harm sank in, that persona evaporated like a mirage. Witnesses in the packed gallery observed a profound physical transformation. It began subtly, a slight tremor in her hands, which she quickly clasped together on the table. Then, her posture, usually ramrod straight, seemed to deflate slightly before she caught herself, shifting violently in the plush leather chair as if it had become electrified. Her eyes, which had been fixed on the judge with a practiced look of attentive concern, widened into pools of pure, unadulterated alarm. They darted, bird-like, from the bench to her lead attorney, then to her second chair, searching their faces for any sign that this was a bad dream, a misheard phrase, a legal maneuver they could counter. Finding only grim, set jaws and pale concern, her gaze dropped to the legal pad before her, but she was no longer seeing words. The color drained from her face, leaving a chalky pallor, only to be violently replaced by a deep, crimson flush that crept from her neckline up to her hairline. It was the hot, telltale bloom of sheer panic. Leaning heavily into her attorney's shoulder, she began whispering a fierce, guttural stream of words meant only for him. Observers could see the tendons in her neck straining. The whisper was not a question. It was a torrent of frantic pressure. Then came the slip. As the judge moved to his next point, a half-stifled exclamation burst from her lips. This is outrageous. The word, louder and sharper than intended, cut through the formal atmosphere. It hung in the air, a shocking breach of courtroom decorum that drew every eye. The judge's head snapped up from his notes, fixing her with a silencing glare that could frost glass. Her lead attorney, in a motion of pure instinct, threw a forearm across her desk, not to comfort, but to physically block and quiet her, hissing a frantic Pam. Not here. The poised, camera-ready persona was gone, obliterated. In its place was the raw, panicked visage of a human being confronting the unthinkable. This visceral loss of control, captured in the hurried strokes of courtroom sketch artists and described in real time by reporters, tapping on silent phones, is perhaps the most telling sign of the judge's seismic impact. More than any legal ruling, this reaction revealed a defendant who, perhaps for the very first time, truly internalized the potential consequences, not as a political abstraction or a fundraising slogan, but as a personal, imminent reality. The political shield forged from partisan affiliation, media alliances, and a career of impunity had audibly cracked. Behind it, no longer a powerhouse or a pundit, stood a vulnerable individual, stripped of her titles, exposed to the full, terrifying force of the law she once commanded. In that one, and guarded utterance, she wasn't arguing the law. She was reacting to its dreadful weight, and the sound was one of pure, undiluted fear. The hearing has adjourned. The judge has left the bench. but the shockwaves from his chamber are just beginning to radiate outward, destabilizing every aspect of the case. Legal analysts on cable news and in Argent online briefs are unanimously labeling the judge's statements a hurricane, warning for the defense not a mere forecast of bad weather, but an authoritative declaration that a catastrophic storm is already forming and landfall is probable. This changes the strategic landscape completely and irrevocably. It dramatically raises the stakes for Bondi's legal team, who now must wage a brutal, two-front war. Their task is no longer solely to fight for an acquittal before a jury. They must simultaneously fight against a judicial mindset that has already, in pre-trial, indicated a leaning toward a prison sentence. Every motion, every objection, every witness examined must now be calibrated with this new, terrifying reality. They are also trying to soften a judge's hardened perspective on sentencing. Consequently, the calculus around a plea deal has been appended. Any discussions that may have been lukewarm, theoretical, or exploratory before are now likely to intensify with a new, desperate urgency. Prosecutors, holding significantly enhanced leverage, may push for a deal that includes not just a felony conviction, but a guaranteed custodial sentence, perhaps shorter than what a trial might bring, but prison nonetheless. Bondi's team is now forced to weigh the gamble of a trial where the judge has previewed a worst-case scenario against the grim certainty of a negotiated sentence. The corridor whispers between legal teams are expected to become central, frantic negotiations for the public and the fractured political world. This is a profound watershed moment. A figure who was literally synonymous with legal authority in America's third-largest state, a person who embodied the power to prosecute, is now on the precipice of being prosecuted into an inmate. The case has transcended one individual's fate. It has become a stark, undeniable benchmark for accountability in the chaotic post-2020 election landscape. It sends a chilling, clarifying message to every corner of the political arena that even the most connected, media-savvy, and politically insulated individuals may eventually face profound personal consequences for their actions. The notion that political power provides permanent legal impunity has been dealt a critical blow. The trial date now looms not as a mere legal proceeding, but as a gateway to a fate the judge has already turned inevitable. Should the prosecution prevail, Pam Bondi left the courtroom today a visibly, fundamentally changed woman. The walk from the defense table to the exit door was that of a stranger in her own life, her heels clicking a hollow rhythm on the polished floor. Her future, her legacy, and her freedom now hinge on a jury, believing she crossed a bright line, the line where political rhetoric becomes unlawful coercion, where persuasion transforms into fraud. The road to prison, while not a certainty, is no longer a hidden, theoretical byway. The judge has erected the signposts. The legal community is reading them aloud. The road is now a clearly marked path, paved with the severity of alleged harm. And for the first time, as she vanished into a waiting car, her hand shielding her face from the cameras, Pam Bondi appeared to be a woman finally, terribly, reading the map. Smash that like button, because this isn't just news, it's history. And your like is what makes sure this story can't be ignored. Right now, that subscribe button is your front row seat to justice. Hit IT, so you never miss what happens when the powerful face the law. Smash the bell too. Next update is coming fast and you won't see it anywhere else. I'll be here, tracking every moment, until the cell door clicks. Stay with me.